Back in 2016, I was 23 and desperate for steady money. That's how I ended up working nights as a security guard at a warehouse on the edge of town. The place was called Redfield Distribution, and it sat way out past the last streetlights, surrounded by empty lots and old loading docks that hadn't been used in years. The job paid way better than it should have, which probably should have been a warning. But at the time, I didn't care. I had rent to pay, a junky car that barely started, and a younger cousin, Evan, crashing on my couch while he figured his life out. So when they said the shift was overnight, I shrugged and took it. Most nights were painfully boring. The warehouse wasn't huge, just long aisles, tall metal shelves, and rows of boxed electronics stacked so high they blocked the lights in places. Laptops, tablets, server parts. Stuff worth stealing, I guess, which was why they wanted someone there all night. My job was simple. Watch the cameras. Do a walk every couple of hours. Write reports if anything weird happened. Usually nothing did. But this night was different. It started raining before my shift even began. Not normal rain, heavy rain. The kind that soaks your clothes in seconds and turns the whole world into noise. Thunder rolled in the distance while I drove out there, and lightning flashed just enough to light up the empty road ahead of me. When I got there around 10:30 p.m., the day crew was already packing up. I talked for a minute with Marla, the supervisor, while she grabbed her coat. She joked about the storm and told me to stay awake. Then the big front doors closed behind them, and the building went quiet. Too quiet. Once everyone leaves, you really feel how alone you are in a place like that. The lights hum. The air smells like dust and cardboard. Every sound feels louder than it should. I settled into the security room, a tiny office with too many monitors and a chair that squeaked every time I moved. Outside, the rain slammed against the roof so hard, it sounded like thousands of fingers tapping all at once. Honestly, that part made me relax. Stormy nights usually meant nobody was out wandering around. About 2 hours in, my eyes were starting to blur from staring at the screens. I stood up and stretched, grabbed my flashlight, and decided to do a walkthrough. I started at the far end of the warehouse, where the storage shelves were packed tight and the lights were dimmer. My footsteps echoed softly as I walked, and every now and then I'd hear the building creak, like it was breathing. That's when I heard it. A faint beeping sound. At first, I thought it was part of the storm, but it kept repeating, slow, steady, a warning tone. My stomach tightened. I turned around and headed back toward the security room, as fast as I could without outright running. One of the monitors was flashing red, a latch alert. Back door. That meant someone had tried to open it. I pulled up the camera feed for the rear entrance. Rain poured down the lens, blurring everything, but I could still see the alley behind the building. Empty. No movement. No shadows. Nothing. I waited, holding my breath, half expecting someone to step into view. No one did. Trying to calm myself down, I told myself it was probably the storm messing with the sensor. It happened sometimes. Still, policy said I had to check it. I grabbed my radio, disabled the alarm, and walked to the back door. The hallway felt longer than before. Darker. The sound of the rain faded as I got closer, replaced by this strange, hollow silence. When I opened the door, cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of wet pavement. The alley was empty. No footsteps. No doors slamming. Just rain pouring down and trash bins rattling in the wind. I checked the latch. It looked fine. I tested the sensor a few times. Perfect every time. Still, I had to file a report. So I locked up and went back to the office, already annoyed at the paperwork. I hadn't even finished the first paragraph when the sound hit. A thud. Not metal. Not cardboard. Heavy. Solid. Like something hitting the floor with weight behind it. I froze, pen hovering over the paper. Then came silence. I stood up slowly and stepped into the hallway, my flashlight shaking just a little. I listened. The rain was still pounding the roof, but underneath it, nothing. No movement. No voices. I started walking again, slower this time, checking each aisle. My light swept across shelves, boxes, concrete floors. Everything looked normal, until I got closer to the front. The sound of the rain suddenly got louder. Too loud. I turned the corner and stopped dead. The front door was wide open. Rainwater spread across the floor in dark puddles, reflecting the ceiling lights. Muddy footprints led inside, trailing off between the shelves. My heart slammed against my ribs. Someone was in the building. I didn't try to be brave. I didn't call out. I turned and ran back to the security room, locked the door, and slammed the emergency button. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the radio. While I waited for the police, I heard more sounds. Another thud, and another. Slow footsteps, dragging slightly, moving somewhere out there in the dark. I held my breath, barely blinking, watching the monitors. On one of the cameras, I saw movement. A shape slipping between shelves, too close to the ground, like someone crouching. Then everything went still. When the police finally arrived, I nearly cried from relief. I let them in and told them everything. They spread out, weapons drawn, voices echoing through the warehouse. A minute later, they came back with a man in handcuffs. He was soaked, filthy, and shaking. In his hands was a hammer, the metal head slick with rain. They said they found him crouched behind boxes near the storage racks, just waiting. As they led him past me, he looked straight at me. His eyes were empty. Not angry, not scared, just blank. Like he'd been staring at those shelves for a long, long time. Later, I found out he was heavily drugged and couldn't explain why he broke in. No plan, no motive, just impulse. I quit that job not long after. Even now, years later, I still think about that night, especially when it rains hard enough to drown out the world. Because sometimes, when everything goes quiet, that's when something moves. My name isn't important anymore, but back then I went by Evan Holloway, and I worked as a night patrol officer in a small town called Briarwood Crossing. This was back in 2014, when the town was quieter, darker, and somehow felt more isolated than it does now. Briarwood sits just far enough off the highway that you don't pass through it by accident. You have to mean to be there. Our department was small, and our schedules were a mess. One week you'd be working evenings, the next week early mornings, and then suddenly you'd be pulled into an overnight shift that wrecked your sleep for days. Your body never really knew what time it was supposed to rest. That constant exhaustion messes with your head more than people realize. Things feel slower. Sounds feel sharper. Shadows stick around longer than they should. That night, I was working a long overnight shift, from 10 at night until well past sunrise. I was halfway through the shift, sitting alone at the station, sipping cold coffee and fighting to keep my eyes open when the radio crackled to life. Dispatch told me someone had called in about teenagers trespassing at an old property on the edge of town. The place was known locally as Ridgeway Medical Center, though it hadn't been a medical center in years. It shut down sometime in the late 90s and had been rotting ever since. Windows smashed out, doors hanging crooked, nature slowly trying to swallow the building whole. Everyone in town knew kids liked to sneak in there. They'd drink, spray graffiti, dare each other to go deeper inside. I'd been sent there a few times before, and it was always the same routine. Honestly, I figured this call would be easy. Walk in, shout a bit, scare them off, and go back to my car. I wasn't in the mood to chase anyone or fill out paperwork. I just wanted quiet. When I pulled up to the hospital, the place looked exactly how you'd expect. Tall, dark, and completely dead. My headlights swept across cracked concrete and weeds growing through old parking lines. As I shut off the engine, I noticed something that made me pause. A light moved across one of the second-floor windows. At first, I thought it might be a reflection, but then it moved again. Fast. Way too fast. It shot across one window, disappeared, then popped up in the next, like someone was running down the hallway with a flashlight. That wasn't normal. Most kids poke around slowly, laughing, daring each other to go further. This felt frantic. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the car. The night air felt heavy and still, like it was pressing down on my ears. I pushed through the broken front entrance and stepped inside. The smell hit me right away. Dust, mold, old water damage. The kind of smell that clings to the back of your throat. I called out, loud and clear, telling anyone inside to come out now. My voice echoed down the halls and then died off into silence. No laughter. No footsteps. Nothing. I stood there for a moment, listening. The building was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Somewhere deep inside, metal creaked, like the place was slowly shifting under its own weight. My hand drifted closer to my side without me even thinking about it. Being alone in a place like that messes with your instincts. I moved deeper into the building, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The hallway stretched out ahead of me, lined with doorways that looked like black mouths waiting to swallow light. I headed for the stairwell and climbed up to the second floor. As soon as my foot hit the last step, a loud bang echoed through the building. It sounded like someone slamming into a wall. Hard. A noise bounced around the halls and made my chest tighten. I swung my flashlight down the second-floor corridor, expecting to catch someone mid-run, but the hallway was empty. No movement, no shadows pulling away. Just peeling paint, old signs hanging crooked, and doors half open. I called out again, louder this time, my voice sharp and demanding. The stairwell behind me was the only clear way, up or down. Anyone up here should have been trapped. I waited. Nothing answered back. I started checking rooms one by one. Each room looked worse than the last. Rusted beds tipped over. Old equipment covered in dust. Graffiti crawling across the walls in ugly colors. My flashlight beam jumped every time something caught the corner of my eye, but it was always just trash or shadows. When I reached the last room at the end of the hall, the door was shut. That alone felt wrong. I announced myself one more time, then pushed the door open. The room was empty, but the smell was different. Sharp, bitter. I looked down and saw cigarette butts scattered across the floor. A few of them were still burning. Thin trails of smoke curled up into the air. Someone had been here seconds ago. My stomach dropped. No one had passed me on the stairs. And the windows in that room were broken, but jumping from the second floor would have meant broken bones, at the very least. Before I could turn around, the door behind me slammed shut, so hard it rattled the walls. Something heavy crashed against it from the outside. I spun around and shoved the door, but it barely moved. I could hear footsteps pounding away down the hallway, fast and uneven, like whoever it was didn't care how much noise they made. Panic surged through me as I realized the door was being held shut. I pushed again, harder this time, my shoulder slamming into the wood. The door finally gave just enough for me to squeeze through. As I stumbled into the hallway, I saw what had been blocking it. A hospital bed had been shoved against the door. Whoever did it was already gone. Backup arrived not long after, and we searched the entire building together. Every room. Every stairwell. Nothing. No one. Just empty halls and the echo of our boots. We talked to the man who'd called it in. He swore he'd seen two teenage boys enter the building together earlier that night. They were supposed to be friends. Always together, according to him. But that didn't line up. I'd only seen one light. I'd only heard one set of footsteps. The next morning, A woman named Marissa Cole came into the station, frantic and pale. Her younger brother, Lucas, hadn't come home. A few hours later, another family reported Ethan Rowe, Lucas's close friend, missing too. The two boys had been inseparable since middle school. Days passed, then weeks. Searches turned up nothing. Months went by, and hope slowly faded into something quieter and heavier. The kind of silence that settles when everyone knows the ending, even if they don't want to say it out loud. Now it's been years. People still talk about Ridgeway sometimes, usually in hushed voices. Some say the boys never made it out. Others swear there was someone else in that building that night, something that wasn't supposed to be there. I still think about the way that flashlight moved. Too fast, too purposeful. And I still wonder who slammed that door shut behind me, and why only one person ever ran out. Back in 2014, I was 21 and stuck in a job I didn't want at a place called North Pine Fuel, a lonely little gas station just off a 2-lane highway outside the small town of Ridgewater. It was surrounded by nothing but trees, fields, and long stretches of road where you could drive for miles without seeing another car. I worked the graveyard shift, midnight to 8 in the morning. Not because I liked it, but because my life was kind of a mess back then. I was helping my older cousin Evan, who was basically my only family at the time, and nights were the only hours that worked for both of us. Evan worked days. I worked nights. We barely crossed paths, but at least we shared rent. I hated that job. Every night I showed up exhausted, already counting the hours until I could leave. The station was old, with buzzing fluorescent lights and shelves that creaked if you leaned on them too hard. When the wind blew just right, the whole building made this low groaning sound, like it was alive and unhappy about it. That night, it was snowing hard. Thick flakes came down sideways, driven by the wind. The kind of snow that soaks your clothes and stings your face. I pulled into the parking lot a little before midnight and parked next to Evan's car. He was covering the first part of the shift for me as a favor. Inside, he looked relieved to see me. "Quiet night," he said, grabbing his jacket. "No weirdos." We joked about that, because weirdos came through more often than normal customers. Evan left a minute later, his car disappearing into the snow, and just like that, I was alone. A manager had left a handwritten note taped to the counter. Clean the coffee machine. Restock drinks. Mop near the bathrooms. Easy stuff. Maybe an hour of work total. I decided to save it for later, figuring I'd knock it out when I started feeling sleepy. Around 12:30, headlights swept across the windows. I looked up and saw an old, dark SUV roll in and stop by one of the pumps. It looked ancient, boxy, like something from the 90s. No music, no engine revving. Just silence once it stopped. That wasn't strange by itself. People stopped by, even in bad weather. Still, something about the way it parked felt off. Crooked. Too close to the pump. I watched for a few seconds, then went back to my phone. I scrolled, watched dumb videos, lost track of time. When I looked up again, about 10 minutes had passed. The SUV hadn't moved. The headlights were off. The engine wasn't running. No door had opened. No one was pumping gas. I stood up and walked closer to the front window. Snow was piling up around the tires. I couldn't see anyone inside. The windows were dark, almost black. I scanned the lot. Nothing. No person. No movement. A tight feeling settled in my chest. It was way too cold to just sit in a dead car. Anyone inside would be freezing. I told myself they were probably inside using the bathroom, but the front doorbell hadn't rung. I waited. Another minute. Then another. Nothing. Finally, I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a slap. Wind whipped snow into my face, and my boots crunched loudly as I walked toward the SUV. The station lights barely reached that far, and everything beyond them felt swallowed by darkness. I leaned toward the driver's window and cupped my hands around my eyes. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound calm. "You okay in there?" No response. I pressed closer, heart pounding, and looked inside. The seat was empty. No driver. No passenger. Nothing. I stepped back, suddenly very aware of how quiet everything was. No cars. No animals. Just wind. As I turned to head back inside, I noticed footprints in the snow. Fresh ones. Leading away from the SUV. They didn't go toward the front door. They went along the side of the building. I followed them with my eyes until they disappeared around the corner. My skin prickled. I didn't like that at all. I decided I'd warm up first and then check it out. That was my excuse anyway. Inside, I turned on the small space heater behind the counter and held my hands out. My fingers were numb. I was there maybe 30 seconds when I heard it. A heavy thump. It came from the back of the store. Not a bang. Not a crash. Just a dull, solid thud. Like something heavy being dropped. I froze. Then I heard it again. A wet sound this time. A slow drag. I swallowed hard and walked around the counter, my footsteps echoing too loudly. Near the hallway to the back room, I saw puddles on the floor. Dirty water mixed with melting snow. Footprints. Leading toward the supply room. My mouth went dry. I leaned around the corner, barely breathing. Someone was standing in the supply room, half hidden behind a shelf. He was tall. Way taller than Evan. Broad shoulders stretching his coat tight. His beard was thick and wild, dusted with snow. And he was staring right at me. Not blinking, not moving. Just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. Instead, I turned and walked back to the counter like nothing was wrong. I don't know why. Shock, maybe? Fear freezing me in place. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and whispered to the operator, telling her someone was inside the store. Then I waited. Those 10 minutes felt endless. I listened for footsteps, breathing, anything. Nothing came from the back. When the police finally arrived, I pointed them toward the supply room. It was empty. The back door was open. Outside, fresh footprints led straight into the snowy field behind the station. Just one set, vanishing into darkness. They never found him. The SUV? No registration. No owner. No record it ever existed. I quit that job a week later. And to this day, whenever it snows, I still think about those footprints, leading away from the light and into nothing. Back in 2019, when I was 17, I got my very first job. Nothing special. I was a delivery driver at a small pizza place called Red Oven Pizza in a town called Maple Hollow. It was one of those towns that looks normal during the day, but feels strange once the sun goes down. I only worked part-time. A few evenings after school, sometimes weekends. I didn't need much money, and honestly, I picked that job because it was slow, not many deliveries. Not much pressure. I didn't want to deal with angry customers or loud coworkers. I just wanted something easy. And for a while, that's exactly what it was. Most shifts were boring in the worst way. Same smells. Same short drives. Same quiet streets. I'd pick up a box, follow the GPS, drop it off, say, "Have a good night," and leave. Half the time I barely remembered where I'd been by the time I got home. Then came that night. It was a Friday, late in the fall. Cold enough that your breath showed when you talked. The store was about to close. Everyone was already tired and ready to go home. We'd cleaned most of the kitchen, lights half dimmed, chairs flipped on tables. Then the printer went off. One last order, everyone groaned. The manager looked at the screen and sighed before handing the ticket to me. "Sorry, Eli," he said. "Last one?" The address wasn't far, but it was in a part of town I never went to. A place called Cedar Ridge. People didn't talk about it much. Not because it was dangerous exactly. Just forgotten. No stores. Barely any houses. Mostly trees and old paths that didn't really go anywhere. I didn't think much of it at first. I grabbed the pizza, got in my car, and followed the GPS. The farther I drove, the quieter it got. Streetlights thinned out. Houses were spaced far apart, sitting back from the road like they were hiding. My headlights felt too weak, like they were being swallowed by the dark. I checked the GPS over and over, because it kept telling me to turn down roads that didn't look like real roads. Finally, it said, "You have arrived," but I knew something was wrong right away. On my left was a short row of old houses, dark windows, no porch lights. On my right was nothing but a narrow path leading into a park called Hawthorne Green. No sign. No lights, just a strip of pavement slipping into trees. The GPS pin was right there, in the park. I sat in my car for a moment, engine running, staring at the screen. My stomach felt tight. I pulled up the address again, just to be sure. It was real. The address didn't belong to a house. It belonged to the park. I almost left. I should have left. But I didn't. I parked on the side of the road, grabbed the pizza, and stepped out. The cold hit me hard. The air smelled damp, like wet leaves and dirt. Somewhere deep in the park, I heard a soft rustling sound. Not loud, just enough to notice. The path wasn't wide. Barely enough for two people to walk side by side. No playground, no benches at first. Just trees leaning in too close, branches creaking when the wind moved them. Then I saw him. A guy sitting on a bench farther down the path. His name was Marcus. I didn't know that yet, but I'd recognize him anywhere after that night. He was older than me. Mid-20s, maybe. Thin. Shoulders hunched like he was trying to make himself smaller. When he noticed me, he raised a hand and gave a weak little wave. That alone felt wrong. Why order a pizza to a park? Why sit in the dark? Why alone? As I walked closer, my footsteps sounded way too loud. Marcus stood up and started digging through his wallet, hands shaking so badly I could hear the leather snapping open and shut. Up close, I could see his face clearly. Pale. Eyes darting around like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. We were cousins, technically. Distant ones. I'd seen him at a family reunion years ago. Barely remembered him. He looked at me like he recognized me too, but didn't say anything about it. I handed him the pizza. He handed me cash. That should have been it. But then he started whispering. Not to me. To himself. "I'm fine," he said. "I'm fine. It's okay. Everything's okay." Over and over. His voice was tight, like he was holding back tears. I felt my skin crawl. I asked him quietly, "Hey, are you all right?" He stopped. Slowly, he lifted his head and looked at me. I swear to you, I'll never forget his eyes. They were wide, wet, terrified, like he was already screaming on the inside. Like he knew something I didn't, like he was begging me to understand without saying a word. That's when I felt it. That cold rush. That instinct that tells you you're not safe. I turned around. A tall man was standing right behind me. I hadn't heard him walk up. Not a single sound. He wore a dark jacket and a cloth mask pulled tight over his face. Only his eyes showed, and they were flat. Empty. He held a knife, so close I could see the dull shine of it in the weak light. He screamed at us to empty our pockets. I didn't think. I just obeyed. Phone, wallet, keys, everything hit the ground. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the pizza. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. He didn't care. He didn't even look at our stuff. Instead, he grabbed both of us and shoved us off the path and into the woods. Branches scraped my arms. Leaves crunched under our feet. The deeper we went, the darker it got. The park sounds disappeared, replaced by heavy breathing and the soft thud of footsteps behind us. We walked like that for minutes, long enough that my legs started to burn, long enough that I lost all sense of direction. Then, without warning, Marcus slammed his shoulder into me. I hit the ground hard. The air shot out of my lungs. Before I could even scream, he took off running. The masked man didn't hesitate. He chased him, not me. I lay there for a second, frozen, listening to footsteps fade into the trees. Then I got up and ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I hit the path, and kept going until I reached my car. The police came fast, lights flashing, voices everywhere. But the woods were empty. Both of them were gone. I still don't know what the man with the knife wanted, but I know it wasn't money. And that scares me more than anything else. Sometimes I think about Marcus, about how he pushed me down, about how that choice saved my life. And sometimes, late at night, when it's quiet, I wonder what he was running from long before I ever showed up with that pizza. Because whatever it was, I think it was already waiting in those woods. Back in 2014, when I was 19, I worked nights delivering food in a small town called Ridgewood Hollow. It was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, and nothing ever really happened. No mall, no movie theater open late, barely any streetlights once you left the main road. I worked at a tiny takeout place called Leo's Oven, and we delivered everything ourselves, because there weren't any big chains around yet. That night, I was finishing my last delivery. Just one pizza left. I remember feeling relieved because it was already really late, somewhere around 2 in the morning, and my shift was supposed to be over an hour earlier. My manager, Darren, had asked me to take it since I was already clocked in, and the address wasn't far. At least not by town standards. The route took me on to Pine Creek Road, a back road most people avoided at night. It cut through a stretch of thick woods and connected the east side of town to the west. No stop signs. No houses, just trees, fog, and the sound of your tires on cracked pavement. During the day, it felt peaceful. At night, it felt like driving through a tunnel that never quite ended. I had my window cracked and the radio low, just enough to keep myself awake. That's when the car started acting weird. At first, it was small. A slight hesitation when I pressed the gas, then a shudder, like the engine was coughing. I glanced at the dashboard. Gas gauge said I was sitting right at half a tank. No warning lights, nothing flashing. I told myself the car was just tired. It was old, and I'd already put too many miles on it. But the farther I went, the worse it got. The car started jerking forward and back, like it couldn't decide whether it wanted to move or quit. I pressed the gas harder, and the engine whined, but didn't respond. Then, without any warning at all, the car just stopped accelerating. I didn't slam to a halt. It rolled, quietly, slowly, like it was giving up. I steered toward the shoulder and let it drift halfway into the grass. When it finally stopped, the silence felt heavy. No bugs, no wind. Just fog rolling low across the road and trees standing like dark walls on either side. I shut the car off and tried to restart it. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. I sat there for a second, hands on the wheel, staring at my own reflection in the windshield. I remember thinking how tired my eyes looked. Then I got out of the car and walked around it with my phone flashlight on, pretending I knew what I was looking for. There was no smoke, no flat tire, no leaks. Just my car sitting there, like it had decided this was as far as it wanted to go. That's when I looked down the road. Ahead of me, there was nothing. Just fog and trees swallowing the pavement. But when I turned around and looked behind me, I froze. Far back on the road, barely visible through the fog, was a shape. Someone standing still, right in the middle of the lane. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline of a person, too tall to be a kid, too still to be someone walking. My chest tightened, and I got back into the car fast, locking the doors without even thinking about it. I called Mason, my cousin. He worked at the shop too and lived nearby. When he answered, I tried to sound calm, but my voice cracked anyway. My car died on Pine Creek, I said. Can you come get me? He paused, then said, yeah, but it'll take me about half an hour. I told him that was fine. After hanging up, I called the customer and explained what happened. They were nice about it, which almost made me feel worse. Once the calls were done, there was nothing left to distract me. I checked my mirrors. The figure was gone. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing in closer to the car. The trees felt closer too, like they'd leaned in while I wasn't looking. I opened the pizza box and grabbed a slice, more out of habit than hunger. My hands were shaking enough that grease dripped onto my jeans. Minutes crawled by. Every sound felt louder than it should have been. The creak of the car settling, my own breathing, the faint rustle of leaves somewhere deep in the woods. Then I heard footsteps, slow, careful, crunching softly over gravel and dead leaves. I leaned forward, staring into the fog so hard my eyes started to burn. A man stepped out from between the trees. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He just walked straight toward my car, like he'd been heading there the whole time. He was wearing dark clothes, and his face looked wrong somehow, like his smile didn't match his eyes. He knocked on my window. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't unlock the door. Sorry, I said, my voice muffled through the glass. I can't open the window. He didn't say a word. Instead, he reached for the door handle and tried it once. When it didn't open, his smile faded. He walked around the back of the car, moving slowly, like he didn't want me to hear him. I watched him in the mirror. He stopped near the trunk and shifted his body, turning slightly away from the road. His hands were busy with something I couldn't see clearly, but my stomach dropped anyway. Then headlights appeared through the fog. A car was coming up behind me. The man stiffened. He looked straight at the lights, then back at my car. For just a second, our eyes met in the mirror. Then he ran, straight into the trees. Gone in seconds. Mason pulled up behind me, tense and alert. He didn't get out right away. When he finally did, he kept looking around like he expected someone to come back. We didn't wait. We left my car there and got out as fast as we could. On the drive back, Mason told me what he'd seen. He had a gun, he said quietly. I saw it when the lights hit him. The police were called. A tow truck came later. My car had been broken into. Stuff was missing. Turns out the gas gauge was stuck. The tank was empty. They never found the man. And sometimes, when I think about that night, I wonder how long he'd been standing there in the fog, waiting for a car to stop. Because if Mason had shown up even a minute later, I don't think I'd be here telling you this story. Extra cheese. The address was way outside town, past the old quarry road. I hesitated for a second. It was a long drive, almost half an hour, and I was tired. But Evan promised it would be my last delivery of the night, and big orders usually meant a decent tip. I figured I could push through one more run. By 12:20, I was heading out. The drive felt off right away. Ridgeway Falls isn't lively on a good night, but this was different. Every road was empty, like the town had been abandoned. The streetlights flickered in that weak, buzzing way they do when they're about to burn out. My headlights felt too small, like they weren't reaching far enough into the dark. When my GPS finally told me I'd arrived, I slowed down, confused. The address led to a massive iron gate standing wide open. Beyond was a long gravel driveway cutting straight through thick woods. It looked like it belonged to a mansion or an estate, something expensive. But as I drove forward, My stomach tightened. There was no house. The driveway ended in a clearing surrounded by trees. Just dirt, rocks, and shadows. For a second, I thought my GPS had glitched. Then I saw it. A soft orange glow flickering between the trees. I parked in the middle of the driveway and turned off the engine, letting the car idle. The night was dead quiet. No crickets, no wind. I stepped out, and that's when I smelled smoke. Real wood smoke. Standing there, I could finally tell the glow came from a fire deeper in the woods. I heard voices too, low and distant, too quiet to understand. A figure stepped forward into the firelight and waved at me. Just one slow wave, not excited, not friendly, just enough to let me know they saw me. I told myself it was probably a group of college kids. People did weird stuff all the time, especially out in the woods. 4 pizzas made sense for a group. I grabbed the boxes from my back seat and left my headlights on, hoping the light would make me feel less alone. As I walked off the driveway and into the trees, the ground felt uneven, like it hadn't been walked on in a long time. Branches snapped under my shoes. With every step, the fire got brighter, and the shadows around it moved in ways I didn't like. When I reached the clearing, I counted at least 7 people. Some were standing. A couple were sitting on logs. None of them smiled. None of them spoke. They just watched me. What hit me right away was how wrong the scene felt. No coolers, no drinks, no backpacks, no phones glowing in anyone's hands, no music, just people and a fire. I stopped at the edge of the clearing and held the pizzas out in front of me like an offering. My mouth felt dry. I waited for someone to step forward, to joke, to complain about how long it took. Anything normal. A tall man finally walked over. He didn't look at my face. He just took the boxes from my hands and passed them behind him to someone else. No thank you. No money. The fire crackled loudly, and suddenly I realized how cold it felt out there. The hairs on my arms stood up. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. More people were coming out of the trees. They moved slowly, stepping into the firelight one by one, until there were at least 12 of them. They formed a loose circle without trying to hide it. All of them were watching me now. No one said a word. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I opened my mouth to ask for payment, but nothing came out. The silence felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I don't know what finally made me turn around. Instinct, maybe? Fear. Whatever it was, I didn't argue with it. I backed away slowly at first, then picked up speed, walking as calmly as I could toward my car. I glanced over my shoulder. They hadn't moved. They just stood there, faces glowing orange, eyes fixed on me. When I broke through the tree line and stepped back onto the driveway, my chest loosened for half a second. Then something moved near my car. 2 shapes darted out from behind it, sprinting straight into the woods on the opposite side. They moved fast, too fast. I froze for a heartbeat, then snapped out of it and ran. I didn't check the doors, didn't look inside. I jumped in, slammed the door shut, and threw the car into reverse. Gravel sprayed everywhere as I backed out and took off down the road, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. I didn't slow down until I hit the main road back into town. When I got back to Tony's, Evan took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. I told him everything, every detail. He tried calling the number on the receipt, but it went straight to voicemail. After a few minutes of arguing with myself, I called the police. An officer told me they'd check it out. Less than an hour later, they called back. They said there was no house, no people, just a bonfire still burning in the clearing, unattended, no footprints, no pizza boxes, nothing. I quit that job 2 weeks later. Even now, I can't drive past Quarry Road without feeling that same tightness in my chest. I don't know who those people were, or why they ordered pizza, or what would have happened if I'd stayed a few seconds longer. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. Back in 2011, when I was 24, I worked nights at a small grocery store called Harper's Market. It sat on the edge of a quiet town named Mill Ridge, the kind of place where nothing ever really happened. No highways nearby, no nightlife, just dark streets and closed buildings once the sun went down. I wasn't some big-shot manager or anything. I was the overnight shift lead, which mostly meant I unlocked the doors for deliveries, handled paperwork, and stocked shelves until morning. It was just a job I took because it paid a little extra for nights. At the time, my girlfriend Lena and I had just moved into our first apartment together, and we needed the money. She hated that I worked nights, always saying the store felt wrong after dark. I used to laugh it off. Harper's Market wasn't part of a huge chain. There were maybe 6 stores total, all scattered across small towns. Ours wasn't very big. A few aisles, a bakery area, a break room, and a storage area in the back. On most nights, I had one other worker with me, usually a stalker named Evan, but every now and then, I'd be scheduled completely alone. Management didn't think it was a big deal. Nothing ever happened in Mill Ridge, right? That night started out painfully normal. I clocked in around 10 p.m., grabbed a cart, and started loading boxes in the back. Cans, cereal, snacks, the usual stuff. The store felt huge when you were the only one in it. Every sound echoed. The hum of the lights, the low buzz of the refrigerators, the faint rattle of the air vents. I pushed my cart into the first aisle and started stocking. It was boring work, the kind you do on autopilot. I remember thinking about what Lena and I were going to do that weekend. Maybe a movie, maybe just sleep. I wasn't really paying attention to anything around me. That's probably why the knock scared me so badly. It came from the front of the store. 3 loud bangs against the glass doors, sharp and sudden. I jumped so hard, I almost dropped a box of soup. My heart started racing before my brain even caught up. For a second, I honestly thought I'd imagined it. Then it happened again. Bang, bang. The sound echoed down every aisle. I stood there, frozen, listening. We were closed. Everyone in town knew that. Slowly, I walked to the end of the aisle and peeked toward the front. Through the big glass doors, I saw a man standing outside. He was tall and wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled way down. His face was mostly shadow, lit only by the parking lot lights behind him. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring straight into the store. I felt uneasy, but I told myself I was overthinking it. People got confused sometimes. I walked up to the door, but stayed inside. Sorry, I called through the glass. We're closed. We open at 8 in the morning. He didn't answer. He didn't even nod. He just stared at me. I pointed at the hour sign taped to the door. We're closed, I repeated, louder this time. For a few seconds, he didn't move at all. Then, slowly, he turned and walked away. Not toward a car, not toward the road, just off into the dark side of the parking lot, where the lights didn't reach. I stood there longer than I probably should have, watching. I never saw a car start, never heard an engine. Eventually, I went back to work, telling myself the guy was probably drunk or lost. By the time 2:30 a.m. rolled around, I'd almost forgotten about him. I took my lunch break in the break room, scrolling through my phone and texting Lena. I told her everything was fine. I didn't mention the guy at the door. I don't know why. Something about it already felt stupid, like it didn't deserve to be said out loud. When I finished eating, I walked back out onto the sales floor. That's when I saw him again. He was inside the store. He was walking across the far end of the building, moving slowly, like he had all the time in the world. His hood was still up. His head was tilted slightly, like he was listening for something. For me, every muscle in my body locked up. My mouth went dry. I remember thinking very clearly, he should not be here. I ducked back into the aisle and crouched behind the shelves, barely breathing. My heart was pounding so hard, I was afraid he'd hear it. His footsteps echoed on the tile floor, slow, heavy, getting closer. He walked toward the break room. I stayed hidden, trying to figure out what to do. My phone was in my pocket, but my hands were shaking so badly, I didn't trust myself to stay quiet. I was just about to make a run for the front door when I heard him suddenly turn around. The footsteps changed. They sped up. He burst out of the break room and started running, straight toward me. I took off. I ran down the aisle, boxes and carts blurring past me. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him turn into the aisle, his face twisted with something that looked like anger or excitement. I couldn't tell which was worse. I reached the front door and yanked my keys out, fumbling like I'd never used them before. My hands were slick with sweat. The footsteps were getting louder, faster. I finally got the door open and stumbled outside. That's when I saw the flash, a bright, white burst of light. Then a deafening bang. My ears rang, and for a second, everything went silent. I realized I'd just heard a gunshot. I didn't look back. I ran around the building, my lungs burning, my legs screaming. I made it to my car, dove into the back seat, and curled up on the floor. I called the police with shaking hands, whispering like he might still be nearby. When the officers arrived, the man was gone. They found the back door smashed open, heavy tools lying on the ground, and right next to the front entrance, in the wall where I'd been standing, was a fresh bullet hole. The police said it was probably a mental break, that I was just unlucky. I quit that job not long after. Even now, years later, I can't stand being alone in big, quiet buildings at night. And every time I hear a knock after dark, my heart still skips, because part of me is always waiting to see that hooded figure staring back through the glass. I was 27 at the time, and this happened in the fall of 2019, back when my life was stuck in a strange in-between phase. I lived alone in a small rental house on the edge of a quiet town called Marrow Glen, the kind of place where nothing ever seemed to happen and everyone went to bed early. My older sister Lena had helped me move in a year earlier, but since then, it was just me and the creaks of an aging house that never quite felt empty. I worked nights from home for a digital security company. People hear cybersecurity and think it's exciting, like hacking movies and flashing screens. In reality, it was just me, half awake, staring at lines of code for hours, looking for patterns that didn't belong. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., which sounds manageable until you're living it night after night. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, your brain feels like wet cotton, and time slows to a crawl. That night, I was especially exhausted. My eyes kept closing, and every time I blinked, I felt like I might not open them again. I kept checking my phone, hoping the clock would magically jump ahead. It never did. By around 2:40 a.m., I knew I needed food if I was going to survive the rest of the shift. I opened a delivery app and scrolled through the options. Almost everything was closed. The only place still delivering was a fast food spot on the other side of town. I hesitated, then ordered anyway. I remember thinking, sorry, whoever has to drive out in this weather, because that's when I noticed the rain. I'd been so locked into my screen that I hadn't heard it at first, but once I stood up and walked into the hallway, the sound hit me. Heavy rain. Not gentle rain, but the kind that smacks against windows and drowns out everything else. I flipped on the porch light and looked out the front window. Water was pouring down the street, turning the road shiny and black. I felt a little guilty, but the order was already confirmed. I sat on the couch, laptop still open on the coffee table, and waited. About 10 minutes later, the app told me the driver had picked up my food. I watched the little car icon move across Merrow Glen's empty streets. There was something oddly hypnotic about it, watching that dot inch closer while the rain hammered outside. When the app said 1 minute away, I grabbed my phone and opened the front door so the driver wouldn't have to stand in the rain. Cold air rushed in. The porch light reflected off the wet steps, and the street beyond looked empty. I stood there, staring down the road. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 5. No headlights, no engine sounds, just rain and a distant hum of wind through the trees. I checked my phone again. The app still showed the driver nearby. When I zoomed in, I saw the car icon stopped just around the corner, right before my street. I leaned out the door and looked both ways. Nothing, no car, no lights, not even tire tracks. I figured maybe the driver couldn't see my house number in the rain. That happens, so I called. The phone rang a few times, then the call was rejected. That made my stomach tighten a little. I tried again. No answer. I stood there awkwardly, half in the doorway, rain misting the porch. After a few more minutes, I called again. This time, the call connected. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "I think you're nearby. Do you need help finding my place?" All I heard was rain. Not quiet rain. Loud, distorted rain, crackling through the phone like static. No breathing, no voice. Just water. I waited. My heart started beating faster. "Hello?" I said. Nothing. I hung up and stared at my phone, feeling suddenly very exposed, standing there with my front door open. When I looked at the app again, it refreshed. The car icon jumped forward. It now showed the driver right outside my house. I looked up so fast it made me dizzy. I scanned the street, the yard, the driveway. There was no car. That's when the fear really started to sink in. Not panic yet, but that heavy, sinking feeling in your gut that tells you something isn't right. I closed the door and locked it. I had barely taken 3 steps toward the hallway when a violent knock slammed into the door. Not a polite knock. Not a delivery knock. It sounded like someone hitting the wood with the side of their fist. I froze. Another knock followed, harder this time. I crept back and looked through the peephole. A man stood on my porch. He was wearing a dark hoodie, pulled low over his face. Rain dripped from the edges of it, running down his nose and chin. He wasn't standing still. He kept pacing in short, tight steps, glancing over his shoulder, then down the street, then back at the door. "Delivery," he called out. His voice was flat, wrong, like he was reading a line he'd memorized. I scanned his hands. No food bag. No drink carrier. Nothing. I didn't answer. His movements grew sharper, more impatient. He knocked again, then again, faster this time. "Food delivery," he said louder. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He leaned forward until his body pressed against the door. His face disappeared from the peephole, replaced by the blurry fabric of his hoodie. I heard a faint scraping sound, slow and deliberate, like metal dragging across wood. I stepped back, my hands shaking. Suddenly, the pressure lifted. Heavy footsteps moved across the porch. I heard him run along the side of the house, splashing through puddles, then nothing. I waited several minutes before I moved. When I finally looked out the window, the porch was empty. I called the police. They arrived quickly, but didn't find much. No driver, no car. They later told me the delivery account was fake, created just hours earlier. 2 days later, while leaving for groceries, I noticed something on my front door, a small scratch. It was shaped like an X, not obvious, not deep, almost hidden in the grain of the wood, like it wasn't meant for me to notice at all. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, thinking about the scraping sound, thinking about the way the man kept looking around like he was checking for witnesses. I painted over the mark that same day. But even now, years later, I still check my porch before opening the door. And every time it rains hard at night, I swear I can hear that knocking again. I was 27 when this happened, back in 2016. At the time, I was living in a small town called Briar Hollow, one of those places where nothing exciting ever seems to happen, and everyone knows everyone else. I worked nights at a discount grocery store on the edge of town called Greenway Market. It sat by itself off a long, poorly lit road, surrounded by trees and an empty parking lot that always felt way too big for such a small store. My job title was night supervisor, but that made it sound way more important than it was. The truth was, I was the only person there overnight. That was it. No coworkers. No security guard. Just me, a mop bucket, a handheld scanner, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights. I handled restocking, inventory checks, cleaning, and occasionally unloading early shipments if one showed up at dawn. I didn't mind the job. Honestly, I kind of liked the quiet. Nights felt calm, predictable. I'd put on a podcast in one ear, take my time stocking shelves, and watch the clock slowly crawl toward morning. Nothing weird had ever happened before. No break-ins, no creepy customers, no unexplained noises. Until that night. It was a Wednesday in early October, and a storm rolled in right as my shift started around 10 p.m. At first. It was just rain. Then the wind picked up. Hard. By midnight, the weather was nasty. Rain slammed into the building like someone was throwing handfuls of gravel at the walls. The wind whistled through cracks I didn't even know were there, making the whole place groan and creak. I started my usual routine, working the back aisles first so I wouldn't have to rush later. The store felt different that night. Not dangerous, exactly, just off. The lights seemed dimmer. The shadows between aisles felt deeper. I kept telling myself it was just the storm messing with my nerves. About 2 hours in, while I was stacking canned soup near the back wall, I heard a loud thud. Not a bang, not a crash, a thud, low and heavy, like something solid hitting metal. It echoed through the store. I froze with the can halfway to the shelf. My first thought was thunder, but it didn't sound like thunder. It sounded closer, sharper, like it came from inside the building. The noise had come from the warehouse area, near the loading bay. That door was thick metal, the kind truck drivers used during deliveries. No one was scheduled that night. I checked the manifest earlier. Nothing until Friday. Still, I grabbed my flashlight and walked back there, trying not to let my imagination get ahead of me. The closer I got, the colder the air felt. The warehouse lights buzzed overhead as I reached the loading door. The more I thought about it, the more that sound felt intentional, like someone had hit the door from the outside. I unlocked it and pulled it open just enough to peek out. Rain blasted me in the face instantly. Cold, stinging drops. Wind howled through the bay, rattling loose debris across the concrete. I shined my light around. No trucks, no headlights, no movement. Just rain pouring down and darkness stretching past the loading area. I shut the door, locked it, and wiped water from my face, laughing quietly at myself. Get a grip, I muttered. Old building. Bad weather. That's all. At least that's what I told myself. I went back to work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Like the store wasn't empty anymore, even though I knew it was. Around 1:30 a.m., I took my break in the tiny office near the back. It was barely big enough for a desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet. No windows, just one solid door. I ate my sandwich, scrolled on my phone, and tried to relax. When I stepped back out into the store 15 minutes later, everything felt wrong. It was quiet. Too quiet. The storm was still going strong, but inside the store, the usual background noises were gone. No humming lights. No distant creaks. Nothing. just the faint tapping of rain on the roof. I stopped walking. That silence crawled under my skin. It felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. Then I saw them. Right there in the middle of aisle 6, beside my stocking cart, were wet footprints. Clear as day. They were shoe prints, dark against the pale floor tiles. Fresh, shiny, water still pooling inside the tread marks. My stomach dropped. I hadn't walked through any water. I hadn't been outside since earlier. And those prints weren't mine. I stepped closer, heart pounding, and followed them with my eyes. The footprints continued down the aisle, then turned toward the front of the store. I followed them without thinking, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The farther I went, the worse it got. Prints everywhere, overlapping, circling, leading into aisles, then out again. Like whoever made them wasn't in a hurry. Like they were just wandering, exploring. The idea that someone had been quietly walking around the store while I was there made my chest feel tight. I felt exposed, watched. I didn't yell. I didn't call out. I just turned and ran. I slammed the office door behind me and locked it, my hands trembling so badly, I dropped my phone the first time I tried to dial. When I finally got through to emergency services, my voice sounded thin and shaky, like it belonged to someone else. I sat there in the dark office, listening. The storm outside was so loud I could barely hear anything else. Every small noise made me flinch. The scrape of the building settling. The faint tick of the clock on the wall. Minutes stretched on forever. Then the dispatcher told me the police were outside. Relief washed over me so fast my knees went weak. I stood up, rushed to the door, and pulled it open. That's when I saw the new footprints. Wet, dark, right outside the office, right next to mine. They stopped inches from the door. I didn't think. I ran, straight to the front, unlocked the doors, and let the officers in. They searched every aisle, every room, every corner. No one was there. Later, we watched the security footage together. A man in a dark hooded jacket entered through a side door I didn't even know had been unlocked. He noticed me almost immediately on camera. From that moment on, he avoided me, stayed out of sight, waited. While I was on break, he wandered the store slowly, touching shelves, staring at products, leaving those wet footprints everywhere. Then came the part one still can't forget. While I was locked in the office, he walked up to the door and stood there, not knocking, not trying the handle, just standing, staring at the doorknob, waiting. After several minutes, he turned and walked out of the store. They never found him. I quit that job 2 weeks later. I still can't stand the sound of rain hitting metal. And sometimes, when a room goes quiet for no reason at all, I swear I can still feel that same heavy silence pressing in. All right, imagine I'm sitting across from you, maybe late at night, just talking. No dramatic buildup. Just telling you something that genuinely messed with me. This happened in 2022, late October, right when fall was giving up and winter was already pushing its way in. I was living in a small town called Pine Hollow, one of those places where everyone says it's quiet, but that quiet never really feels peaceful. More like it's watching you. Back then, I was doing food delivery full-time. I'd been at it for about 4 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunk customers, sketchy apartment buildings, weird instructions. You name it. I wasn't easily rattled anymore, which is probably why I ignored my gut that night. It was around 10 p.m., and snow had just started coming down. Not a full blizzard or anything, just that slow, soft snow that makes the world feel muted, like someone turned the volume knob down. In Pine Hollow, the first snow always freaks people out. Roads empty fast. Folks stay inside. But that also means delivery orders go crazy. I was one of the only cars still out. My old SUV hummed along, tires crunching softly over snow-dusted roads. Order after order kept popping up on my phone. I barely had time to breathe between stops. Around midnight, I was tired, hungry, and already thinking about my bed. I remember saying out loud, "One more. Just one more." That's when the order came in. It was from a burger place on the edge of town. The delivery address was only 10 minutes away, so I didn't think twice. I hit accept and headed out. While I waited for the food, I sent a quick voice message to my younger sister Mara, who was staying at my place that week. "Almost done," I told her. "One last run." She joked back, telling me not to get murdered. I laughed at the time. I wish I hadn't. When I finally pulled away with the food, I glanced at my map and felt that little jolt of annoyance. The house wasn't just 10 minutes away. It was 10 minutes in the wrong direction. Deep on the far side of town, past the places anyone had a reason to go. I was already half an hour from home, and this meant I'd be even farther. I thought about canceling. I really did. But I didn't. As I drove, the town thinned out fast. Street lights became fewer, spaced farther apart. Buildings disappeared, replaced by long stretches of trees. Tall, dark pines pressed close to the road, their branches sagging under the snow. My headlights cut narrow tunnels through the darkness, and everything outside that beam felt endless. I noticed something strange then. No other cars. Not behind me. Not coming toward me. Just me, my engine, and the soft hiss of snow hitting the windshield. The road I was on usually led to the highway, the one people used to leave town altogether. I'd driven it plenty of times, but never this late, and never in weather like this. When my GPS told me to turn onto a side road, I frowned. The street was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass. Trees crowded in so close, it felt like the road had been carved out as an afterthought. No fresh tire tracks, just untouched snow. I slowed way down. My tires crunched softly as I turned, and immediately I felt cut off, like I'd stepped behind a curtain. The air felt heavier somehow. Still, too still. As I crept forward, I started noticing driveways. Long ones, they disappeared deep into the woods, with faint yellow lights glowing far back, like distant eyes watching from between the trees. Every driveway looked the same. Gravel buried under snow. No signs, no numbers. Finally, the GPS told me to turn. The driveway was long and winding, and by the time the house came into view, my chest felt tight. It was an older place, 2 stories, paint peeling beneath the snow. The porch light flickered like it couldn't decide whether to stay on or give up. The house sat alone, surrounded by forest on all sides. No nearby neighbors. No sounds, not even wind. I parked and just sat there for a second, staring at the house. Snow ticked softly against my windshield. My phone buzzed with a message from Mara. "You alive?" I typed back, "Yeah, almost home." I grabbed the food and stepped out. The cold hit me hard. Snow was deeper than I expected, soaking through my shoes instantly. Each step toward the porch felt louder than it should have been. My breath puffed out in little clouds. When I reached the door, I knocked and bent down to set the bag down. The door flew open so suddenly I flinched. A man stood there. He was tall, broad shoulders. Thick winter coat zipped all the way up. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes looked wrong somehow. Too focused, too alert. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "Got your order." He didn't reach for it. Instead, he stepped back and pulled the door wider. "Set it inside," he said, pointing into the house. His voice was calm, but there was something off about it, like he was repeating something he'd practiced. I looked past him. The inside of the house was dark. No warm lights. No TV noise. Just shadows. "I'm actually not allowed to go inside," I said. I can just hand it to you. His mouth twitched. Just slightly. Inside? He said again. Every instinct I had screamed no. I shook my head. Sorry. I really need to head out. The change in him was instant. His face hardened, and without another word, he slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the woods. I stood there, heart pounding, staring at the door. My hands were shaking. After a second, I set the food down and turned around. That's when I heard it. A noise, not from the front door, from the side of the house. Footsteps, crunching snow. I didn't run. I wish I had. Instead, I walked fast, trying not to slip, every nerve buzzing. I reached my car, yanked the door open, and climbed in. As I started the engine, I looked up. The man was coming around the side of the house. He was moving fast, too fast, and he was holding something. At first, I thought it was rope, thick, coiled. Then I saw something metal glint in the porch light. My heart slammed into my throat. I threw the car into reverse, tires spinning, engine whining. The SUV slid, stuck for a terrifying second, and then lurched backward. The man was only a few feet away now, close enough that I could see his breath. His eyes locked onto me. He didn't shout. He didn't wave. He just watched. The car finally caught traction, and I backed all the way down the driveway, barely breathing. When I hit the road and sped off, I looked in my mirror. He stood there, at the edge of the driveway, holding that thing in his hands, completely still, until the darkness swallowed him. I drove all the way home shaking. Mara was waiting when I walked in. One look at my face, and she knew something was wrong. I didn't tell her everything. Not that night. I still do deliveries. But I'm different now. I don't go to places that feel wrong. I don't step on to dark porches. I drop the food and leave. Because sometimes, when the snow starts falling early, I think about that house in the woods. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken one more step inside.